Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Sirhan on X, live from Cincinnati, Ohio, in the United States. Hope everyone had themselves a wonderful Christmas Eve and Christmas the past couple of days. Hope everyone got lots of presents. Hope everybody is happy. Holiday season is here. I hope everyone had a good time and enjoyed the days yesterday. And hope everyone had themselves a wonderful 26th of December 2024. Of course, being the day after Christmas, some of you guys probably went shopping and returned stuff you didn't like. But you know, we all can be happy. I enjoyed the 2 days myself. You know, chance to breathe a little bit from a tenuous schedule at work, but back at it tomorrow. But Merry Christmas, everyone. Hope everyone had themselves a wonderful holiday. Just going to get right down to it here real quickly. Uh, got some new people over here. I see. Just touch base on what I do. Nothing but sports content over here. None of the wild stuff that goes on with it. I don't partake in anything else. Just strictly sports related. So and I just give opinions on topics. The top ones being the NFL, boxing, sometimes, and even the college football playoff. I even do some MMA every now and then, but maybe again occasionally NBA. But that's pretty much it. Nothing more than that. I mean, I don't partake in any of the craziness that's going on in the world these days because I stay over here while everybody is out there. All right. Of course, it was yesterday. It was Kansas City just demolishing Pittsburgh. Game wasn't even as close as the score indicated because I thought Kansas did anything they wanted to up and down the field. Uh, but no Chris Jones, but it doesn't matter. The Kansas defense just played lights out, shut down the Pittsburgh offense, and sacked Russell Wilson 5 times. Uh, got the interception in the end zone. Of course, on offense, Patrick Mahomes did basically anything and everything he wanted to. You could probably argue the game was essentially over early and basically at halftime. Even though Pittsburgh, made a nice little run at the end. Problem was, it was all Kansas City. They clinched the 1 seed. I said all along they was going to clinch the 1 seed. A lot of people weren't happy with what I had to say. I told you so. I mean, they got the 1 seed. They're probably going to sit guys for the season finale against Denver. A lot of people say it's going to be a 2 to 3 week difference. Let me remind you, back in 2020, when they clinched the 1 seed this early, they had a 3 week period, and they went to the Super Bowl that year after being off 21 straight days. So Kansas City knows what they're doing. They've been in these big games before. They've dealt with a lot of key injuries. Guys still banged up. I mean, Isaiah Pacheco left the game early at one point. He just came back from a foot injury. So Kansas is going to more likely rest guys before they play their first playoff game of the divisional round at Arrowhead. And good luck trying to stop what they have coming on, because now you brought back Hollywood Brown, and it gives them a new dimension. Because one thing I liked what I saw yesterday was the quick out would put Hollywood Brown in the slot. We run the slant route, and you had Mahomes throwing the quick out, and Hollywood Brown just would make big play after big play when he has a chance. Good thing is Hollywood Brown got him some regular season snaps before the playoffs, because now he becomes an extra weapon for Patrick Mahomes on that offense. And you already have basically a 3 to 4 headed monster at running back with Pacheco, Hunt, and Samaje Perine. And of course, the 2 tight ends with Kelsey and Noah Gray. Good luck trying to slow down that Kansas offense. And that defense is Steve Spagnuolo is going to put together a game plan to get that defense playing at a high level. Good luck trying to slow this down. Remember, they got 5 sacks on Pittsburgh without Chris Jones. That should tell you something right there. In the last 3 weeks, Trent McDuffie's become a ball hawk with 2 interceptions and a forced fumble. Kansas is ready to go. A three-peat is more than likely incoming, and there's nothing anybody can do about it. And of course, we have people all over the place saying, if Kansas wins again, it's going to be insufferable. You're not going to watch. Newsflash, I don't think Kansas City gives a darn about whether you watch or not, because they have bigger fish to fry right now, because they're chasing history, and they're going to make history, and we're going to have a conversation after the season about their place in history once this three-peat is complete, because that's what's more than likely going to happen. But for Pittsburgh, they're still going to the playoffs. They got 10 wins. They'll beat Cincinnati in the season finale, get to that 11th. Whether it's good enough to win the AFC North over Baltimore remains to be seen, because Baltimore, which I'll touch on here in a second, has Cleveland. They'll probably handle them, because the loser of the AFC North is going to get to the 5 seed to play Houston which I think probably favors Pittsburgh. Now, let me remind you, Pittsburgh gets in that wild card spot. They have all the tiebreakers over the more likely two teams is going to be there. That's the Chargers and the Broncos. They'll probably get the 5 seed, having to go to Houston, which I think they have a real shot at winning that game if it gets to that point. But even though they lost bad yesterday, I think they're eventually going to be fine. Just Kansas was on a mission to clinch the 1 seed. They smelled blood. Probably their best win of the season. We consider all the close games and close calls they had all season long. Their best win of the season. Kansas City is clicking at the right time, and they're going to roll into the playoffs pretty much hot. Good luck trying to win an Arrowhead because you're going to need a lot of it. Now, the other game last night was, of course, Baltimore just annihilating Houston. I mean, outside of Derrick Henry running into a guy getting tackled in the end zone for a safety, it was basically perfection. Baltimore's defense is starting to catch up with their offense here a little bit in recent weeks. That's the one thing I've noticed. I said there was no way they could have been this bad because there were times early in the season they were just awful. But Marlon Humphrey has stepped up in the secondary. Of course, you have Kyle Hamilton. Roquan Smith starting to play better. Remember, he came to training camp, looked like he was a little bit on the heavier side, a little overweight and a little bit slow, but he's starting to round into form. That defensive front, one of the better run defenses in the league. And of course, on offense, Lamar Jackson, who might just be the MVP, showed why he's an MVP candidate with just a terrific performance. And Derrick Henry just ran wild. Mark Andrews, Lamar Jackson's favorite target, looked like he's starting to really round into shape as he has in the last few weeks. After a slow start to the season, he's coming to form. And Baltimore looks like they're clicking right now. Looks like they're going to probably beat Cleveland and win the AFC North for a second straight year. But for Houston, just a real bit of a trying year. Got off to a pretty solid start. Then injuries just took over and they just fell off the map. I mean, they lost Stephon Diggs. They lost Tank Dell. They recently picked up Deontay Johnson. I don't know how good that's going to be. I mean, Joe Mixon is useless at times, which he was here in Cincinnati. We can relate to it. Of course, put C.J. Stroud a bit of behind the 8 ball a little bit, but they're in the playoffs. They won the division. That's basically they're locked in the 4 seed. I pretty much expect them to sit everyone for the season finale against Tennessee. Of course, they get the Aziz Al-Shahir back. Don't know. He was the one who was suspended 3 games for the hit on Trevor Lawrence. They're going to get a home game, probably more likely against Pittsburgh. Good luck with that because they're decimated in the wrong areas, and they're not playing the best ball right now at the worst possible time. I mean, the ceiling with them, I thought, was winning the division. Anything other than that was basically going to be an overachievement because the core of this roster is still pretty darn young when you look at it, especially in the defensive front. We have a Will Anderson Jr., who's becoming one of the better edge rushers in the league. And, of course, you have Stroud at quarterback. But just a trying year for Houston. They won the divisions, and they're still going to the playoffs. Let's see where everything goes from here. So a trying year for Houston for the most part. But I said for Baltimore, they're going to probably win the AFC North, get the 3 seed. I mean, they have a shot at the 2 seed if they win and Buffalo loses out, which is probably unlikely. But even then, Baltimore's clicking at the right time themselves, just like Kansas is. Which leads me to tonight's game and the rest of the Week 17 games. I'm going to focus on the ones with playoff implications and seeding purposes because that's where we're at this point. There's some games that really don't matter anymore, so I'm just going to ignore those. The one tonight, Seattle at Chicago. Seattle clinging to a playoff spot, in the playoff race per se, going against a Chicago team that's basically been done for a while. I mean, Caleb Williams has been beat up, and I expect Seattle to follow suit, get the win here, because I think Chicago, I think the best bet is to plummet and try and get a higher pick. And Seattle still hanging on for a playoff spot. Geno Smith started the season well, fell off, but I expect him to pick it up and get a win here as he try to keep their slim playoff hopes alive. Of course, the Saturday games, a couple real good ones here. Well, the Chargers and the Patriots. I expect the Chargers to win this one to clinch at least a 6 seed. I know they're not going to have Gus Edwards I heard J.K. Dobbins is questionable. I don't think they really need them because New England is tanking right now. I mean, we saw it against Buffalo where they were making some real questionable decisions in a game that they had under control for the most part. And I don't expect them to win. I expect them to basically lose out at this point. Give me the Chargers on the road. They smell blood for a playoff spot. They will officially clinch it tomorrow. Excuse me, Saturday. I keep thinking tomorrow's Friday. I don't know why. Of course, the big one here in Cincinnati is Denver and Cincinnati. Here's the thing. Cincinnati is 0-7 this year against teams with winning records. Think about it. 0-7 against teams with winning records, 7-1 against teams with losing records. Let's get that out of the way. We have Bengals fans automatically thinking this game is a lock. Pause. The team that's coming here Saturday night laid an egg against the Chargers and against a game they have full control. I expect the Broncos to come ready and at it over here. They know the environment they're going into. Here's another problem. You guys are 2-5 on your home field this season, and your 2 home wins are against the Raiders and the Browns. That's another problem also. And you expect this one to be a gimme. Expect them to handle business against the Broncos. Now, I know the Broncos could be hot and cold. The defense is very consistent throughout the year. We talk about Nick Bonito and, of course, Pat Surtain, which, by the way, the matchup of the year, Pat Surtain versus Jamar Chase, must watch. I'll acknowledge that. But the team was 2-5 on your home field, and you're expecting to beat a Broncos team who's coming off a loss to the Chargers, which they basically had and just fell asleep at the wheel. Good luck. That's not happening. Give me the Broncos on the road. They clinch the other playoff spot, clinch the 7th seed. But I'll say this. I think Cincinnati is going to fight to the end. I mean, Joe Burrow is not going to let the Bengals just roll over and play dead. I mean, this is going to be a very, very competitive game. Problem is, the Bengals defense is going to get dog walked by the running back, that 3-headed, 4-headed running back monster they have in Denver, led by Javonte Williams. And basically, you let Jerome Ford run wild on you the other day. Good luck trying to slow down Javonte Williams. That's a different story. I expect this to be a shootout, but give me Denver on the road because the Bengals defense will find a way to muck it up again. Of course, you have Orlando Brown Jr. back. Call that subtraction by addition because Orlando Brown brings nothing at this point. So give me the Broncos on that one. It'll be a great game. Probably the game of the weekend here because Cincinnati's fighting for a last playoff spot. Denver's basically a win in your in situation. And basically they clinch, they win it, it's all over. And I think the Broncos finish the deal. Good one in LA. The Rams and the Cardinals. I tried to hang on the Cardinals bandwagon for the longest time. Overall, better than many people expect. I said they were my surprise team, but the wheels just fell off. And I don't expect them to win in LA. The Rams smell blood of winning the NFC West. I expect that to continue. Give me LA on the road on that one. So there's my Saturday picks. Some of the ones here for playoff implications, playoff positioning, whatever you will. Cowboys and the Eagles. Eagles can clinch the division. I expect them to, especially after the announcement of CeeDee Lamb down with the AC joint. The Cowboys is basically just going to sit them for the rest of the year, which makes sense. They're not going anywhere. Eagles clinch the division officially on Sunday. Carolina and Tampa. Tampa still in the running for a playoff spot. More likely, they have to win the division. They don't have to win the NFC South to get in because Washington has 10 wins, and that's going to be tough. But give me Tampa at home. I think Baker Mayfield is going to just carve a Carolina team that's basically tanking at this point because they have work to do. Jets at Bills. Bills playing for a seeding. I expect them to clinch it here. Won't be easy because it's a division rival. The Jets have always given Josh Allen problems. But Buffalo wins this one at home. They're going to clinch the 2 seed with the win. Indy at the Giants. Indy's going to have a cupcake schedule the rest of the way. I know Anthony Richardson is a very, very unpredictable quarterback. But give me Indy on the road on this one. Again, situation here. Giants are basically tanking for that number 1 pick with Jacksonville. That's the final 2 opponents for Indy. I expect Indy to win out. And they're going to do it here against the Giants. Let's see. Miami at Cleveland. Miami hanging on to the slimmest of hopes, trying to win out to try find some form of a catch with Denver for that last playoff spot. Give me Miami on the road. I, uh, I think Cleveland is just tanking themselves. Miami, you know, they got going, but probably in case of too little, too late. They got Tua back, but it's not going to matter. They'll probably beat Cleveland. They'll win out, but they're going to miss out on the playoffs. An excellent game in Minnesota. This is Green Bay and Minnesota. Still, both teams positioning for the NFC North title. Think about how crazy this is going to be when we talk about the NFC playoffs. Detroit, Minnesota, and Green Bay all have at least 11 wins. I think Green Bay's 11, Minnesota, Detroit, I think each have 13 apiece. Two of those teams are going to be playing the playoff games on the road. Think about that for a minute. You have two teams, one with 11 wins, one with 13 wins. Whoever it's going to be is going to be playing games on the road. And if Green Bay manages to win out, you're going to have three teams with at least 13 wins in that division. Think about it. Three teams in the same division with 13 wins. Two of those are going to be playing playoff games on the road. That's one of the most crazy things I have ever seen. And this one here is going to be a good doozy. I mean, last time Jordan Love didn't play particularly great. Minnesota's defense picked him up, I think it was like 3 times by halftime. But of course, remember, Love was coming back from the MCL sprain he had. I think this time it's going to be a down to the wire game. The chess match between Brian Flores and with that standout defense going against the Green Bay offense with Jordan Love. And the Green Bay defense has played pretty darn impressive in recent weeks. I'm going to skip this slight nod at home to Minnesota at home. I think they just find a way to eke it out. This one is a coin flip. If you ask me tomorrow, I probably would pick Green Bay. I mean, it's probably the game of the weekend right here. I mean, this one I think is going to be fantastic. It's going to be must watch. Look, I'll be home to catch a big chunk of this. It's going to be a great game. The Sunday nighter, of course, this was flexed for whatever the words the NFL wants to use. This was Atlanta against Washington. Atlanta trying to hold off Tampa for the NFC South title. Remember, they're tied, but Atlanta has the tiebreaker, having swept the season series over Tampa. Problem is they're playing a Washington team whose quarterback, Jaden Daniels, is just playing absolutely surreal football right now. Just to get him in the playoffs with the 10 wins. And at home, I expect them to get that 11th and officially clinch that last playoff spot. Because, Washington is just feeling it right now. I mean, they have to be real confident after how they came back against Philly. Give me Washington at home. They're going to get 11 wins and clinch that last playoff spot in the NFC. And, of course, the Monday night game, the rematch of the NFC title game, which is Detroit and San Francisco. In the beginning, this looked like the game of the year. Of course, it's been a very, very trying year for San Francisco with the injuries and the unfortunate circumstances with Shadavius Ward and Trent Williams losing their children. My hearts and condolences to them and their families. But Detroit is just cooking right now. I mean, what can you say? They just find ways to win every single way possible. This despite having a laundry list of defensive players on the IR the way they have it. They're just cooking. They're just finding ways to win. They're going to do it here against San Francisco as they try to hold off Minnesota and Green Bay for the NFC North title and potentially the number 1 seed. So good luck with some of these games. I mean, the NFC playoffs is crazy. You're looking at 3 teams potentially. Out of the 2 of the 3 being out of Minnesota, Green Bay, and Detroit. 2 of those are going to be in that wild card picture, and Washington potentially finishing with at least 11 wins, and 3 of those teams are going to have to play playoff games on the road. Think about it. 11 win teams having to play playoff games on the road. That's the structure how the NFL wants it. It's a little crazy. I mean, I might be in the minority on this. Anybody wants to disagree, go ahead, have at it. But I've said this. I always said the team with a better record should be the one that hosts a playoff game. So I know there was this outcry back in 2010 when the Saints and the Seahawks played. When the Saints were 11-5, and the Seahawks, I think they were like 7-9 and won the NFC West. They hosted the playoff game. Of course, the outcry there was should Seattle host it or should New Orleans host it. I've been one of the minority on this. I think the team with a better record should be the one that hosts a playoff game because I think it's just a weird circumstance to explain it. I mean, I get they want to put value in winning division titles. Understood. I mean, I respect it, but it's just a me thing. Again, I might be in the solo minority on this, which is fine because I like to go against the grain. But it's just me. The better team should be the one that hosts the playoff game because you look at Minnesota already has 13 wins, and at the seating as is, they're going to have to go on the road. Green Bay with 11 wins, with the seating as is, they're going to have to go on the road. Washington 10 wins, with the seating as is, they have to go on the road. That's just crazy to have 3 11 win teams having to play opening playoff games on the road. I mean, it's just wild. I think it goes to show how competitive the NFC has come this season because, for the last couple of years, the AFC was considered the premier conference of the two. We consider how top heavy it was with Kansas, Baltimore, Buffalo, Houston. You can add now the Chargers and the Steelers in there. But the NFC is rather deep when you consider 5 teams with at least 10 wins or more right now. It's just crazy to think this, especially when you consider 3 teams in the NFC North could possibly finish with at least 12 wins. That's wild. That's the NFC picture. AFC, Kansas clinched it, the number 1 seed. We know what's going to happen there. Buffalo's going to probably get to 2 when they beat the Jets. Of course, Baltimore and Pittsburgh for the AFC North title. Winner wins the AFC North title, likely gets the 3 seed. Loser probably gets the 5 seed and has to go to Houston, which I think is Baltimore's going to get the AFC North title. And Pittsburgh's going to get the 5 seed, having to go to Houston. Houston's locked in on the 4 seed. Of course, Raiders a 6 and a 7 seed, which I think is wrapped Saturday when the Chargers and Broncos finish this off. And we're going to have a lot of fun with this. Of course, the Colts and the Dolphins basically have to win out just to maintain their status. Same with the Bengals. But of course, it's going to come down to what happens week 18 when Kansas goes to Denver. Of course, the perception is going to be that the Chiefs are going to rest guys and let Denver win so they can keep everybody out. Problem is the Chiefs don't care who's in, who's out. Whoever's on their schedule, they'll play them, they'll beat them, they'll get the three-peat, and there's nothing anybody can do about it, especially in Denver and Cincinnati, because you guys are running your mouths about it. Kansas is the number 1 seed. They earned it. They can do whatever the hell they want in that season finale in Denver. Now to another topic in the NFL. Speaking of the NFC, it comes out that there was an altercation that took place between the Philadelphia head coach Nick Sirianni versus the Washington tight end Zach Ertz. Don't know what the parameters are. Just came across as, remember the Eagles, security staff had to separate. But it's another case of why Nick Sirianni is one of the biggest douchebags when it comes to being a head coach. Look, I like Nick Sirianni. He's done a nice job in Philly. But the way he carries himself at times, I'm surprised Philly fans can put up with it. I mean, I trace back to what happened last season in a Monday night game when they beat the Kansas City Chiefs. That great win they had. The only reason why they won that game was because Marquez Valdez-Scantling didn't have the balls to make a catch to save his life. Especially when the ball was placed in his hands. You can even see it on Mahomes' face. But the way Nick Sirianni and the Eagles walked out of that into the locker room after that game, saying we don't have to see these guys anymore, and how he's carried himself really ever since, going to even a game this season against the Browns where he was basically going at Eagles fans. It was kind of a video camera. Just goes to show what kind of a clown and a douchebag Nick Sirianni can be. Look, they've had a great season. Not sure why he feels the need to do this. But let me remind you, after the way he carried himself in the regular season win against Kansas City last year, they had a high-profile Sunday afternoon game against San Francisco where Brock Purdy just torched the crap out of the Eagles secondary, and the wheels fell off, capped off by the playoff loss in Tampa where Baker Mayfield just shredded him in the exact same way that Brock Purdy did. And this year, Nick Sirianni, we said he had taunted the fans after a win against Cleveland, where they only won by 4 points. And after the loss here, whatever the altercation is with Zach Ertz. Zach Ertz is one of the more stand-up guys that always takes a high road. Solid tight end for many years, especially going back to his years in Philly, and even Arizona. But I'm not sure why a coach would want to confront a player like this, especially the way that Nick Sirianni does. But it goes to show what Nick Sirianni is and what he can be. One of the biggest douchebags and clowns, whatever you want to call it. I mean, he could be a good coach. I mean, he's won 12. I mean, he's going to, I think, his second NFC East title in the last 3 years. Got to give him that. But Jesus Pete, someone needs to tell this guy to grow up and stop being a clown for once, because it's always something with him, always. So that's my football talk for the week. Uh, for some of my new followers, that even the ones in the boxing field know, people call this my specialty, or like to say I'm equally special in many fields. There was a very historic moment, and I mean very historic, that took place over 100 years ago today. It needs to be touched on. This was for the heavyweight championship of the world. This was between Tommy Burns and Jack Johnson. I'm not. That's of course the sensitive fields. I remind everyone respectfully, if you guys can talk about it amongst yourselves, but I will not use this platform or any platform to talk about the sensitive side of this, because it's not my nature and it's not who I am. Because I want to just talk about the boxing aspect of it, because it was something of significance. Because Jack Johnson lived in a time when, well, I'll just say this once respectfully. You call it the Jim Crow era. We know what that was. I mean, I won't divulge into it. Everybody knows what that was. Born out of Galveston, Texas in 1878. He quit school. He was working at docks, and basically he found himself working at a racetrack where he was uh, exercising horses for racing. Uh, Met an individual, a fellow by the name of Walter Lewis, who worked in the fields, and basically Walter Lewis was a guy who loved to watch fighters spar. And basically, what happened was Jack Johnson visited him, and that was where he started to understand how to box. And during his jobs, Jack Johnson learned how to save money to buy boxing gloves so he could start to take up boxing. Uh, at the time, this was after the bare knuckle era, well known by the great John L. Sullivan, which you guys can research this, because John L. Sullivan was one of the real ones that brought boxing into America, because it was sort of new at this time. No one knew much about it. Uh, Jack Johnson, of course, started his career, persevered, eventually wanted to fight the well-known James J. Jeffries, who was at that time considered the greatest heavyweight of all time. I mean, the weights back then were a lot different than they are now. But mind you, this is 116 years ago that James J. Jeffries was considered widely regarded as the greatest ever. Uh, because of the sensitive areas that I won't touch on, Jeffries refused to give Jack Johnson a title shot, so he vacated the title, and that was where Tommy Burns picked it up. We talk about the style of Jack Johnson. You don't see this much back in those days. A fighter that loves to keep his hands up, very defensive. He was one of those ones that got better as a fight wore on. It got stronger. That's who Jack Johnson was. I mean, better than expected as a defensive fighter back then, because defensive fighters back then were like a dime a dozen. Because back then it was like, let your hands go. Johnson was like one of a rare breed during that era. So he gets to fight Tommy Burns. Real name was Noah Brusso, an aggressive fighter. There's a throwback fighter, just aggressive, high volume puncher, likes to throw punches at different angles. It's very, very aggressive, comes straight forward. Also a very solid counter puncher for that time. Uh, he reigned as a heavyweight champion for 3 years going into this fight. And at that time, he had the record for most consecutive title defenses that ended by a knockout or a stoppage, which was 8 at the time. It was eventually surpassed by Larry Holmes. When he won the title, he was the only fighter, Canadian-born, to ever wear the heavyweight championship of the world. I remind you guys, a lot of people throw the name of Lennox Lewis. Lennox Lewis was never born in Canada. He was born in Jamaica, moved to Canada, then eventually moved, residing in England. So Tommy Burns, still the only Canadian fighter to hold the heavyweight championship of the world. Uh, Again, Burns also was like Jeffries, didn't want to give Jack Johnson the shot for the obvious reasons. But of course, the promoter paid him $30,000 at the time, which is the equivalent to $1.1 million today, to go ahead and take this fight. And Jack Johnson was paid $5,000. I think probably like similar, like equivalent of like $300,000 to $400,000 today, if that was the case. Uh, the fight basically itself, not much to really talk about because it was all Jack Johnson. Jack Johnson saw this opportunity to make history, and he did it. He just did anything he basically wanted to. Burns was a tough as nails fighter in those days, but anything Burns tried, Jack Johnson just had an answer for with his style, his slick, very slick, his ability to defend, block, and counter back way back in those days was a once in a blue moon. We're talking back in the early 1900s here. This is 1908. The fight was basically that one-sided to where the police. Never mind, there was no corners to the point. It was the police that had to stop this fight in the 14th round. Basically, it was basically enough for everyone to see, and Jack Johnson is crowned the heavyweight champion of the world. The first black fighter to win the heavyweight championship of the world. I could go on and on about all of this with him, but I'm not going to. There's a documentary on the PBS channel about the rise and fall of Jack Johnson. If you want to learn about this, it's something I would highly, highly recommend for you guys to watch because Jack Johnson went through a lot just to get to this point, and he finally hit his high point when he beat Tommy Burns. He successfully defended his title several times, beating the standout Stanley Ketchel, which led eventually to the fight he finally wanted. That was against James J. Jeffries. This was a rare case. There was $101,000 in the pot, which basically equates like $3 million today. Winner will get 75%. The loser will get 25%. This was billed as the fight of the century, which we had a bunch of those in the 20th century. I could go on and on with those. But for a fight that took place in 1910, this fight happened. But basically, Jeffries was coming out of retirement because he wanted this. And basically, same thing here. It was Jack Johnson with the big win. It basically sealed his legacy in a fight that, it was all basically Jack Johnson did all he could. I mean, just James J. Jeffries was out of the sport for a couple of years. But mind you, if you're out of back then, if you was out of the sport for a while, it was a lot different than it is now, where people can learn how to wrestle and recover. Back then, if you're out for about a year, you ring rust and you feel it, and that's what happened with James J. Jeffries when he fought Jack Johnson. Of course, everybody knows about the rest of the Johnson's life legacy. I won't get into it because it crosses sensitive fields. But I'll just conclude by saying he finally got the pardon he rightfully deserved in 2018 by then President Donald Trump. So that part of his life was sealed. When we talk about the all-time great heavyweights, because of what he did in 1908, Jack Johnson's on there. We're not talking about guys like Joe Louis, Muhammad Ali, Larry Holmes, Evander Holyfield, Lennox Lewis, et cetera, if it wasn't for this night. And Jack Johnson just broke a barrier, knocked it down, and basically just cemented himself amongst the all-time greats, just simply because he became a pioneer and basically almost like a trendsetter for what was to come later on. Because, of course, a couple of decades later, this guy named Joe Louis came around, and we know the story with Joe Louis. 12 years, 25 successful title defenses of the heavyweight championship of the world. No one is saying Jack Johnson's the greatest, but his impact on what he did to Tommy Burns in this night, we're not even having any kind of conversation with any of this if it wasn't for this night. We talk about the all-time great heavyweights, and I want to segue to this. The top two are no-brainers. Number one, Muhammad Ali. We know what that's all about. Number two, Joe Louis. 12 years, 25 successful title defenses of the undisputed heavyweight championship of the world. Let me remind you guys again, because you guys love belts so much, because we have idiots in the boxing community who think belts mean more than fighters. This was the one belt, winner take all era, where you won one belt, party was over. That's what Joe Louis did. That's what Muhammad Ali did. I mean, the gap from Ali to Lewis is sizable because for many reasons, but from Lewis to the field, that's sizable. 3 through 10 or 3 through 15, all-time great heavyweights. You guys have at it because it's always going to be up for debate. But if Muhammad Ali is not number one and Joe Louis is not number two, I give you zero credibility for many, many reasons. I'm not going to use this platform for it. I'll search you out and talk to you personally myself because there's a reason why Ali was the greatest. There's a reason why Joe Louis has a record that's never going to be touched, especially in the political world of how the sport is ran today. I mean, we can talk about all the great heavyweights. I mentioned Jack Johnson. Of course, there was Jack Dempsey. You throw it, obviously, the 70s with Ali. You have, of course, George Foreman and Joe Frazier. In the 80s, you had Larry Holmes. And, of course, the cream of the crop of the 90s, the two that was left standing were Evander Holyfield and Lennox Lewis. Of course, Foreman was in there when he won the title. He reascended himself amongst the all-time greats in the heavyweight division. And basically, if you were to wrap it up in the 2000s, Vladimir Klitschko and his reign, some people want to challenge his reign, but you can't deny the fact the guy had the reign that he did, and he's certainly up there. Some other guys you can throw up there also. You can have a Jersey Joe Walcott in there. You can have a Sonny Liston, obviously, is up there. Floyd Patterson, Rocky Marciano, obviously, because he retired undefeated. There's always debate where he belongs up there. I mean, he's in my top 10 easily. You could throw in maybe even a Max Schmeling is on that list. You could throw a Gene. I would say Gene Tunney also, but Tunney's success was more at light heavyweight than it was at heavyweight. Tunney was known for the 2 victories over Jack Dempsey in that weight class. Let me remind you, back then, weight classes were way different than it is now. Lots of ways you can go in the heavyweight division. Lots of standout guys that basically made their marks of historical significance all over the place. I mean, from 3 on down, have at it, because there's no real unanimous list when it comes from that. But number 1 is Muhammad Ali. Gap, 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 gap. Number 2 is Joe Louis. Gap, 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 gap. 3 through the rest. Have at it. Because if I don't see Ali and Joe Louis as your top 2 heavyweights of all time, I'll be having a personal conversation with you, and you're not going to like it. Because some of you guys want to put crazy people in the top 2 lists. Ali and Louis basically have records that are never going to be touched. Ali, the lineal 3-time heavyweight champion, not the fake belt Daniel Dubois has, the legit lineal 3-time heavyweight champion. Joe Louis, with 1 belt, 12 times, successfully defended it 25 times. I mean, and of course, what Louis did to Max Schmeling when he pasted him face first on the canvas in the probably the greatest revenge fight in boxing history, that's a capper for him. Lots of ways you can go, lots of names. 3 through 10 is always going to spark debate in that category. But, I don't partake in it because there's a real unanimous consensus. I mean, some people put Lennox Lewis up there. Acceptable. A couple of my followers put Larry Holmes. Acceptable. You could maybe throw up some people, a guy like a Foreman, Jack Johnson, Jack Dempsey. List goes on and on. Just a deep, deep talent pool of heavyweights from the 3rd rank down to whatever you want to go, top 10 or top 12, top 15. It's a great list. Which brings me to one last topic, and I'll wrap this up. I've seen a lot of people put Alexander Usyk among the top 4 or 5 great heavyweights of all time. Look, anybody knows me knows I back Alexander Usyk to the moon and back. I love me some Alexander Usyk. I am very, very Phil. But a top 5 heavyweight, some of you guys need to seriously check for CTE at this point. I mean, you guys seriously do. I mean, I love Alexander Usyk, but the guy's not an all-time great heavyweight in that regard. Because if you're going to put him in that regard, you better do something of real significance. I mean, he's definitely not over Ali or Joe Louis. Forget that. I mean, can you put him over a George Foreman? Could you put him over a Lennox Lewis? Or even Evander Holyfield? I mean, think about it. Holyfield, 3 times a legit heavyweight champ and won a belt in 2000 over John Ruiz. Can you put him over a Joe Frazier? Jack Johnson? Jack Dempsey? Rocky Marciano? Again, we're not talking about head-to-head these fantasy matchups. I think it's just the most ignorant thing you guys can do in the boxing community. But how you gonna stack Alexander Usyk with those guys when they've done it for a longer time and of greater significance in some of the more significant matchups in boxing history, especially in the heavyweight division, at a time when the heavyweight division was the glamour prize in all of sports. I mean, it was a time it even surpassed the Super Bowl, the World Series, and winning NBA titles. And I love Alexander Usyk. I mean, you want to call him the greatest of this era? Perfect, because that's what he was. Yes, the greatest of this era. It's a no-brainer. Over Inoue, Crawford, all those guys. Usyk tips the iceberg. To put him with guys like Ali, Lewis, Holyfield, Lewis, and all them guys, come on. Let's cool it a little bit. I mean, too many guys are too deep into this recency bias in our sport to think that all. I don't know what happened there. Screen went out. The recency bias to where you guys just don't know or even bother to understand the significance of what those greats did to open the doors and set the paths for some of the fighters that are fighting today. That's why I had to bring up Jack Johnson, because we're not having conversations about some of those, excuse me for using this cliche, and I do apologize for this, some of the great African-American fighters that came after him. Because if Jack Johnson does not do this, we're not having conversations about Lewis Ali, Lennox Lewis, George Foreman, Larry Holmes, et cetera, et cetera. I want to put things in perspective a little bit when you jump to this recency bias conversation, because some of you guys sometimes go way, way overboard, don't even bother doing adequate research, don't even talk to the adequate people, because it's all out there now. You guys can research it for yourselves. And by the way, this is coming from a guy who loves Alexander Usyk to the moon and back. I am Phil. I am very, very, very Phil. By the way, Alexander Usyk, you did us all a favor by getting rid of Tyson Fury for good. Thank you very much. And on that note, I will wrap up this night edition of Sirhan on X. And I hope everyone had themselves a Merry Christmas and a wonderful 26th of December 2024, the day after Christmas. Good luck trying to get your holiday returns on, because the weekend is going to be absolutely madhouse all over the place. I'll just be working while you guys take care of that. Until then, hope everyone had themselves a wonderful night. Take care of yourselves, and God bless.